baby pointed at me. That is the first thing you need to know. When Alexis Esposito hauled herself into that rain-slicked dumpster behind the Bellissimo Club, she didn't expect to find life. She expected rats, maybe a stray cat. But what she pulled from the filth was a pair of wide, terrified eyes staring up at her from beneath layers of garbage. Most people would have screamed. Most people would have run. But Alexis didn't know that the crying infant, clinging to her mud-stained uniform, was Alessandro La Rosa, the vanished heir to the most feared crime family in the city. She didn't know that the man now standing at the mouth of that alley, gun drawn and tattooed hands trembling, was Franco La Rosa himself. And she certainly didn't expect that when the traumatized child raised one tiny, grime-covered finger and whispered his first clear word. Mum. It would freeze a killer in his tracks and bind her fate to his forever. What happens when a penniless maid becomes the only thing standing between a mafia boss and his son's survival? The answer would shake the entire underworld. Comment where you are watching from. Let's begin. The safe house smelled like gun oil and old cigars. Alexis had never been in a place that felt so expensive and so suffocating at the same time. Marble floors, leather furniture the color of dried blood, and everywhere men in dark suits with dead eyes who watched her like she was something that needed to be put down. Franco La Rosa hadn't said a word during the drive. He'd simply grabbed her arm with one tattooed hand, pulled Alessandro from her chest with the other, and shoved them both into the back of a black SUV. The baby had screamed. God, how he'd screamed. A sound so raw and primal that even the driver had flinched. Franco had frozen, those cold eyes flickering between the infant and Alexis, before finally, reluctantly, passing the child back to her. Alessandro had buried his face in her neck, his tiny fists clutching her filthy uniform like she was the only solid thing in the world. Now they sat across from each other, in a room with no windows. Franco behind a desk, Alexis in a chair that felt more like an interrogation seat. Alessandro was asleep in her arms, his breathing finally steady, one small hand tangled in her hair. Start from the beginning. Franco's voice was quiet. Too quiet. The kind of quiet that preceded violence. Alexis swallowed. Her throat was raw from the rain, from the screaming, from the terror that had been building in her chest since the moment she'd seen the gun. I work at the Bellissimo. Double shift. I was taking out the trash when I heard crying. I thought it was a cat at first, but then You expect me to believe you just found my son in a dumpster? Franco leaned forward, and Alexis could see the tattoos creeping up from his collar. Roses, thorns, names she couldn't read. You expect me to believe you had nothing to do with putting him there? I didn't even know who he was. The words came out sharper than she'd intended. Alessandro stirred against her shoulder, and she forced herself to lower her voice. I've never seen you before, in my life. I don't know anything about your family or your business or... Then why did he call you Mum? The question hung in the air like smoke. Alexis had been asking herself the same thing for the past hour. She looked down at the baby, at his tear-stained face and the grime still clinging to his red onesie. I don't know. Maybe he's confused. Maybe he's traumatized. Maybe you've been taking care of him. Franco stood, and suddenly the room felt smaller. He moved around the desk with the grace of a predator, stopping just close enough that Alexis could smell his cologne. Something dark and expensive that made her stomach twist. Maybe someone paid you to kidnap him. Maybe you've had him this whole time, and tonight was just theater. A performance designed to make me think you're some kind of hero. Alexis's hands tightened around Alessandro. If I kidnapped him, why would I be climbing into a dumpster to pull him out, to cover your tracks, to gain my trust? Franco crouched down until they were eye level, and Alexis forced herself not to look away. To get close to me. I don't want to be close to you. The anger surprised her. It burned through the fear, hot and sudden. I don't want to be here at all. I want to go home. I want to take a shower and forget this entire nightmare happened. But I can't, because this baby, your baby, won't let go of me. As if on cue, Alessandro's eyes fluttered open. He looked at Franco, and his face crumpled. The wail started low, building into something that sounded like pure heartbreak. Franco reached for him, and the screaming intensified. The baby kicked, arching away from his father, his small face turning purple with the effort of his cries. "Alessandro!" Franco's voice cracked, just slightly, just enough. "Alessandro, it's me. It's Papa." But the baby didn't care. He buried himself deeper into Alexis's chest, sobbing with the kind of desperation that made her own eyes burn. She rocked him instinctively, murmuring nonsense words, and slowly, so slowly, the crying subsided into hiccups. Franco stepped back. His jaw was tight, his hands curled into fists at his sides. For a long moment, he just stared at them, at his son, at the stranger his son had chosen. "DNA test," he said finally. "We'll know by morning if you're lying about being his mother." "I'm not his mother." Alexis's voice was steady now, certain. "But right now, I'm the only one he wants." Franco's eyes flashed with something dangerous, something that might have been anger or might have been pain. "Then you'll stay here, with him, until I figure out what the hell is going on. And if I refuse?" The smile Franco gave her didn't reach his eyes. "You won't." The DNA results came back at dawn. Franco slid the paper across the breakfast table without a word, his eyes rimmed with the kind of exhaustion that came from a sleepless night, spent pacing the halls. Alexis picked up the document with one hand, while balancing Alessandro on her hip with the other. The baby was gnawing on a piece of toast, content for the first time since she'd found him. Probability of maternity, 0%. Satisfied. Alexis set the paper down and met Franco's gaze. She'd spent the night in a guest room that was bigger than her entire apartment, wearing borrowed clothes that probably cost more than she made in a month. Every time she'd tried to put Alessandro in the crib, he'd woken up screaming. She'd finally given up and let him sleep on her chest, his small body rising and falling with her breath. Franco didn't answer. He was watching his son, watching the way Alessandro leaned into Alexis, like she was gravity itself. The doctor says it's attachment disorder. Trauma-induced bonding with the first person who showed him safety after whatever hell he went through. "So you believe me now?" "I believe the science." Franco's fingers drummed against the table. "But that doesn't answer the question of who took him, or why someone from my own organization had access to throw him away like garbage." The words were sharp enough to cut. Alexis had pieced together enough from the whispered conversations between Franco's men to understand the basics. Alessandro had been taken from his nursery 3 days ago. No ransom demand, no body. Just vanished like he'd never existed. And then, somehow, he'd ended up in a dumpster behind a club that Franco's family owned. Someone inside had betrayed him. Someone close. "I need to find them." Franco stood abruptly, and Alessandro's head whipped around, his eyes going wide. "And when I do, I need to know my son is safe." "Then hire a nanny, a bodyguard, someone qualified." Alexis shifted Alessandro higher on her hip. I can't. He won't let anyone else touch him." Franco's voice was flat, final. "We've tried. Last night, while you were sleeping, I had 3 different people attempt to hold him. A pediatric nurse, my own sister, even his actual mother." Alexis's stomach dropped. "His mother?" "Sophia, my ex-wife." Franco's jaw tightened. She left when Alessandro was 6 months old. Didn't want the life, didn't want the responsibility. But when she heard he was missing, she came back. Tears. Apologies. The whole performance. He looked at Alexis with something that might have been respect or might have been resentment. He screamed in her arms like she was a stranger. "But you? You're the only one he wants." Alessandro chose that moment to grab Alexis's face with both sticky hands, pressing his forehead against hers in a gesture so trusting it made her chest ache. She'd told herself 100 times since last night that this wasn't her problem, that she should walk away while she still could. But every time she looked at those dark eyes, she saw the dumpster. The rain, the way he'd been thrown away like he was nothing. "I have a job," she said quietly. "An apartment. A life that doesn't involve armed guards and bulletproof windows." "Had." Franco pulled an envelope from his jacket and set it on the table. "I bought out your employment contract from the Bellissimo. Your landlord has been compensated for the remainder of your lease, plus damages. Your belongings are being packed as we speak." "You can't just—" Alexis's voice rose and Alessandro whimpered. She forced herself to breathe. "You can't control my entire life. I'm not trying to control it." Franco opened the envelope and pulled out a single sheet of paper. "A contract. I'm trying to save it. And my sons. Because whoever wanted him dead, they're still out there, and they're going to try again." The contract was simple, brutally so. Acting primary caretaker for Alessandro La Rosa. Duration, until threat is eliminated. Compensation, $1 million. Alexis stared at the number until it stopped looking like words and started looking like a future. A future where she wasn't scrubbing toilets, where she wasn't one missed shift away from eviction, where she could afford to fix the cavity that had been throbbing in her back molar for 6 months. "You'll live here," Franco continued, his tone businesslike now, clinical. "Full security, private suite. Access to anything Alessandro needs. You'll report directly to me. No one else. And when you find whoever did this, when the threat is gone—" Franco's expression darkened. "Then you'll be free to leave, with enough money to never work another day in your life." Alessandro babbled something and patted Alexis's cheek. She looked down at him, at this child who'd chosen her for reasons neither of them understood, and felt the decision settling into her bones like concrete. "I want it in writing that I can leave whenever I choose, that if this arrangement doesn't work, I walk away with compensation proportional to time served." Franco's mouth curved into something that wasn't quite a smile. "Smart." He pulled out a pen and slid it across the table. "Sign at the bottom." Alexis picked up the pen. Her hand shook only slightly as she wrote her name. "If you are still listening, my wife said I wouldn't hit 4,000 subscribers. I need you to prove her wrong. Thank you for this. Let's continue." The dress was wrong. Alexis knew it the moment she walked into the dining room and saw the way Franco's head of household, a silver-haired woman named Claudia, looked at her. Not quite disgust, not quite pity. Something worse. Dismissal, like Alexis was a stain that would eventually wash out. "Breakfast is served at 8 sharp, Miss Esposito." Claudia's voice could have cut glass. The Don does not appreciate tardiness. It was 8:03. Alexis had spent the last 20 minutes trying to convince Alessandro to wear actual clothes instead of just a diaper, a battle she'd lost spectacularly. Now the baby sat on her hip in nothing but a onesie, cheerfully destroying a croissant and getting butter in her hair. Noted. Alexis slid into the chair across from Franco, who was reading something on his phone and hadn't looked up. She'd been living in the La Rosa compound for 3 days, and already she felt like an imposter in a museum. Everything here was breakable, expensive, wrong for someone whose nicest outfit before this week had been a uniform with someone else's name stitched on it. The dress, pale blue silk that Claudia had laid out for her this morning, was beautiful. It was also designed for someone who knew how to exist in it. Alexis kept tugging at the neckline, hyper-aware of how much skin it showed, how different she looked from the woman who'd pulled a baby from a dumpster. "You look uncomfortable," Franco's voice made her jump. He was watching her now, those dark eyes tracking every nervous gesture. "I'm fine. You're pulling at the dress like it's attacking you. It cost more than my car." Alexis gave up and let her hand drop. "I'm terrified I'm going to spill something on it." "Then spill," Franco returned to his phone. "I'll buy you 10 more. From the corner of the room, she heard one of the serving staff, a young man named Marco, snort. He quickly covered it with a cough, but not before Claudia shot him a look that could have stripped paint. "Miss Esposito is a guest in this house," Claudia said, her tone making it clear she thought Alexis was anything but. "She will be treated with the same courtesy as any member of the family." The words were correct. The delivery was poison. Alexis had dealt with enough hotel managers and passive-aggressive co-workers to recognize the game. She was being tested, judged, found wanting by people who probably made more in a year than she'd seen in her lifetime, but still needed to remind her that she didn't belong. She might have let it slide, might have kept her head down and focused on Alessandro. But then she overheard the conversation in the kitchen that afternoon. "Did you see what she was wearing at breakfast? Like putting silk on a street cat?" Franco's lost his mind. First Sophia, now this. At least Sophia knew which fork to use. "I give it a week before he gets tired of playing house and sends her back to whatever gutter he found her in." Alessandro was napping in his stroller. Alexis had been about to walk past the kitchen entirely, but the words stopped her cold. She stood in the doorway, and the 3 women at the counter, Claudia, Marco's sister, and another maid whose name Alexis hadn't learned, went silent. "You're right," Alexis said quietly. "I don't know which fork to use. I don't know how to walk in heels without looking like a baby giraffe. And I definitely don't know how to survive in a world where people throw children in the trash because they're inconvenient." She stepped into the kitchen, and all 3 women took an involuntary step back. "But I do know that Alessandro is alive because I didn't care about getting dirty. Because I climbed into that dumpster while all of you, while everyone in his own family, did nothing." "How dare you?" Claudia started, but Alexis wasn't finished. "I'm not here because I want to be. I'm here because that baby upstairs needs someone who'll put him first. Not the family name, not the inheritance. Him." Her voice was shaking now, but she didn't care. "So you can mock my clothes and my manners and whatever else makes you feel superior. But if I ever hear you talking about sending me back to the gutter while there's still a threat to Alessandro's life, we're going to have a very different conversation." The silence that followed was absolute. Then, from behind her, a slow clap. Franco stood in the doorway, still in the suit he'd worn to whatever meeting had kept him gone all morning. His expression was unreadable, but there was something in his eyes that might have been approval. "Claudia, you're dismissed for the day." His tone left no room for argument. Marco's sister. What's your name? Valentina. Don La Rosa. Valentina, you'll be working in the East Wing until further notice, far away from Miss Esposito and my son. Franco's gaze shifted to the third woman, who looked like she wanted to disappear into the marble. You get one warning. I don't give second chances. The women scattered like birds. Franco stepped into the kitchen, close enough that Alexis could smell his cologne again. That same dark, expensive scent that made her think of dangerous things. The dress looks fine, he said quietly. But next time someone makes you uncomfortable, come to me first. I can fight my own battles. I know. The corner of his mouth lifted, almost a smile. That's why you're still here. Alessandro had finally fallen asleep after an hour of crying. Teething, the pediatrician had said, as if that simple word could explain the way the baby had sobbed like his heart was breaking. Alexis had walked circles around the nursery until her feet ached, singing every lullaby she half remembered from childhood, until at last his breathing had evened out and his grip on her shirt had loosened. Now she stood on the balcony outside her suite, desperate for air that didn't smell like baby powder and exhaustion. The compound stretched out below her, all manicured gardens and security lights that turned night into something artificial. She'd been here a week, and already the outside world felt like something from another life. You should be sleeping. Alexis didn't turn around. She'd gotten used to the way Franco appeared without warning, moving through his own house like a ghost. So should you. I don't sleep much. He stepped onto the balcony beside her, and she caught the scent of whiskey underneath the cologne. Not drunk. Franco was too controlled for that, but loosened. Tired in a way she hadn't seen before. Not since Alessandro was taken. They stood in silence for a moment. The night air was cool enough to raise goosebumps on her arms, but Alexis didn't move. There was something almost peaceful about this, about existing in the same space without the usual tension that crackled between them during the day. Can I ask you something? The words came out before she could stop them. Franco's jaw tightened slightly, but he nodded. The tattoos. Alexis gestured vaguely at his forearms, visible now that he'd rolled up his shirt sleeves. Do they mean something? Or are they just what? Decoration? There was no heat in the question, just curiosity. You think I let someone ink my skin for aesthetics? I don't know what to think about you. The admission felt dangerous. True. You're a mystery, wrapped in expensive suits and death threats. Franco exhaled, a sound that might have been amusement. He held out his right arm, rotating it so she could see the roses that wound from wrist to elbow. Dark red blooms intertwined with thorns sharp enough to draw blood. My mother, Rosa. She died when I was 12. Cancer. Alexis looked closer. Woven between the thorns were names in script so delicate it must have taken hours. Your grandmother, Franco continued, pointing to one. My uncle Marco. My brother Antonio. His finger stopped on a name that made his voice crack just slightly. My daughter. Lucia. The world tilted. You have a daughter? Had. Franco pulled his arm back, but not before Alexis saw the way his hand trembled. She was 6 months old. Pneumonia. The doctor said it was fast, that she didn't suffer, but He stopped, swallowed. That's a lie they tell parents so we can sleep at night. Franco, I'm so... Don't! The word was sharp enough to cut. I don't need sympathy. I need you to understand why I can't lose Alessandro too. He turned to face her fully, and in the moonlight, she could see the exhaustion carved into every line of his face. Lucia died in my arms. I felt her take her last breath. And I swore, I would never feel that helpless again. Alexis's throat burned. Is that why you and Sophia? Sophia blamed me. Said if I'd been a normal father, if we'd lived a normal life, the doctors would have caught it sooner. Maybe she was right. Franco looked down at his hands, at the ink that covered them like armor. She left 2 months after the funeral. Took Alessandro with her at first. But the grief, it broke her too. She dropped him back here when he was 9 months old and disappeared. I thought raising him alone would kill me. And then someone actually tried to kill him, and I realized I didn't know the first goddamn thing about being a father. The confession hung between them, raw and bleeding. Alexis had spent the last week thinking of Franco as untouchable, dangerous, a man who could snap his fingers and make people disappear. But now, standing here with his sleeves rolled up and his defenses down, he looked like what he was, a father terrified of failing again. You're not helpless, Alexis said quietly. You're doing everything you can to protect him. Am I? Because from where I'm standing, I'm paying a stranger to raise my son because he won't even look at me without crying. The bitterness in Franco's voice was palpable. What kind of father does that make me? The kind who puts his child's needs above his pride. Alexis reached out without thinking and touched the rose on his forearm, tracing the outline of a petal. These aren't just tattoos, they're promises. Proof that you remember, that you carry them with you. Franco went very still under her touch. When he spoke again, his voice was rough. I'm getting one for Alessandro, when this is over, when he's safe. He will be. Alexis pulled her hand back, suddenly aware of how close they were standing. We'll make sure of it. We! Franco repeated the word like he was testing it. You say that like you're staying. I signed a contract, didn't I? Contracts can be broken. He was looking at her now with an intensity that made her pulse quicken. For the right price. I don't want your money. The words were out before Alexis could think better of them. I want Alessandro to be safe. I want him to grow up knowing he's loved. That's worth more than any contract. Something shifted in Franco's expression, softened. He reached up and touched her cheek, his tattooed fingers gentle against her skin. You're either the best person I've ever met, or the most foolish. Can't I be both? This time, when Franco smiled, it reached his eyes. Alessandro loved the garden. It was the one place where he seemed truly happy. Chasing butterflies with unsteady toddler steps, while Alexis followed close behind, ready to catch him when he inevitably tumbled. The roses were in full bloom, their scent heavy in the afternoon air. And for a moment, just a moment, Alexis could almost forget that they were living in a gilded cage surrounded by men with guns. She was kneeling in the grass, helping Alessandro examine a ladybug, when she felt it. That prickling sensation at the base of her neck that said she was being watched. Alexis looked up slowly, scanning the garden's perimeter. The compound was always crawling with security. Men in dark suits stationed at every entrance, cameras hidden in the hedges, pressure sensors beneath the gravel paths. Franco had explained it all with the casual efficiency of someone describing a grocery list. She'd gotten used to the constant surveillance, the way privacy was a luxury that didn't exist here. But this felt different, pointed, malicious. Her eyes caught movement near the west wing, a figure standing behind one of the tall windows, partially obscured by curtains, watching them. The angle was wrong for casual observation. Whoever it was had positioned themselves deliberately, staying just out of clear view. Alessandro squealed and grabbed her hand, oblivious to the way her heart had started hammering. Up, he demanded, making grabby hands. "Up, Mama." He'd started calling her that 3 days ago. Mama. Not the confused mum from the alley, but the full word, said with the confidence of a child who knew exactly who belonged to him. Franco had overheard it once, and had gone so still that Alexis thought he might shatter. He'd left the room without a word. "Okay, baby, up we go." Alexis scooped Alessandro onto her hip, her eyes never leaving the window. The figure shifted, and for just a second she caught a glimpse of a face. Too far away to identify clearly, but close enough to see they were staring directly at her. And then they were gone. Alexis walked back to the house, with Alessandro babbling in her ear, trying to convince herself she was being paranoid. This was Franco's compound, his territory. Everyone here had been vetted, background checked, loyalty tested in ways she probably didn't want to know about. But someone had taken Alessandro. Someone had thrown him away like garbage, and Franco still hadn't found out who. That evening, she mentioned it to Marco during dinner. He was one of the few staff members who'd been kind to her after the kitchen incident, bringing her coffee in the mornings and teaching her which silverware to use without making her feel stupid about it. "West Wing?" Marco frowned, setting down the water pitcher. "That's mostly storage now. Old offices. Don La Rosa's father used to conduct business there before he'd passed. Who has access? Senior family members, head of security. Claudia, I suppose, since she manages the household." Marco's expression shifted, something guarded sliding into place. "Why do you ask?" "Just curious." Alexis forced a smile. "Alessandro loves exploring. I want to make sure I know which areas are off limits." But Marco's eyes said he didn't believe her. He glanced toward the doorway, where one of Franco's guards stood, always listening, always watching. "Miss Esposito, if you're concerned about something, you should speak to the Don directly." It was good advice, logical, but something in her gut twisted at the idea. She'd already disrupted Franco's entire life, already forced him to confront the fact that his son preferred a stranger to his own father. Bothering him with shadows and paranoia felt like crossing yet another line. She waited until Alessandro was asleep that night, before she went looking. The West Wing was exactly as Marco had described, dusty, neglected, full of furniture covered in white sheets like ghosts. But as Alexis moved through the rooms, her phone's flashlight cutting through the darkness, she noticed something odd. Fresh footprints in the dust, leading to and from the window where she'd seen the figure. Her blood went cold. She followed the trail to a small office at the end of the hall. The door was ajar, and inside she could see papers scattered across a desk. Alexis pushed the door open fully, her hand shaking as she raised her phone. Photographs, dozens of them, tacked to the walls like a shrine. Alessandro as a newborn, Alessandro in his nursery, Alessandro crying, sleeping, eating, and in the center, written in red marker across a calendar, dates circled with notes in the margins. Nanny dismissed. New route to pediatrician. Security shift change. Someone had been planning this for months, documenting every detail of Alessandro's life, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. And they were still here. Alexis heard the footstep behind her, too late. She spun around, but a hand clamped over her mouth, and she felt the cold press of metal against her ribs. "You should have minded your own business," a voice hissed in her ear. Female. Familiar. "Now you're going to come with me very quietly, or the baby dies tonight." Alexis's scream died in her throat as she recognized the voice. Claudia. The gun pressed harder against Alexis's ribs, and Claudia's breath was hot against her ear. "Move." They walked through the darkened corridors of the West Wing, Claudia's grip iron tight on Alexis's arm. Every instinct screamed at her to fight, to run, but the gun was a cold promise against her side, and all she could think about was Alessandro sleeping 3 floors above them, vulnerable and unaware. "Why?" Alexis's voice came out strangled. "Why would you hurt him? You've worked for this family for 20 years. Claudia's laugh was bitter. 20 years of watching Franco's father build an empire, then watching Franco nearly destroy it with his weakness. Sophia. That dead baby. And now this. Bringing a maid into the family, like she's something precious instead of trash he picked up off the street. They'd reached the main floor now. The marble hallway stretched before them, lit by dim security lights. Claudia steered her toward Franco's private study, and Alexis's confusion spiked into panic. "What are we—" "Shut up!" Claudia shoved her forward, and Alexis stumbled into the study. The room was exactly as Franco had left it. Papers on the desk, a half-empty glass of whiskey, his jacket draped over the chair. And there, on the side table, was Franco's mother's ring. The rose-gold band with the single ruby that he kept in a velvet box, that he'd shown her once when she'd asked about the name Rosa. Claudia pulled the ring from its box and pressed it into Alexis's hand, closing her fingers around it. "Hold this." "What are you—" The slap came so fast Alexis didn't see it coming. Her head snapped to the side, and she tasted blood. Before she could recover, Claudia had yanked her hand up, pressing her fingers against the ring, the box, the desk, leaving prints everywhere. Perfect. Claudia stepped back, and suddenly the gun was gone, hidden. Her whole demeanor shifted, smoothing into the professional mask Alexis had seen 100 times. "Now scream." "What? I said scream!" Claudia's eyes were wild. "Or I go upstairs right now and smother that baby in his crib." The threat detonated in Alexis's chest. She opened her mouth, and the scream that came out was real terror, raw and jagged. It echoed through the compound like a gunshot. Footsteps thundered down the hallway. Doors slammed open. And then Franco was there, gun drawn, 3 guards at his back. His eyes swept the scene. Alexis standing by the desk, the ring in her hand, the velvet box on the floor. Claudia by the doorway, her face a perfect mask of shock and distress. "Don La Rosa," Claudia gasped. "I heard noise. I came to investigate and found her. She was stealing your mother's ring." Franco's gaze locked on Alexis, cold, calculating, the same look he'd given her in the alley that first night, when she was just a problem to be solved. "No." Alexis's voice shook. "No, she forced me in here. She put the ring in my hand. Franco, she's been— Search her." Franco's voice was flat. "Dead." The guards moved forward, and one of them pulled Alexis's phone from her pocket. The other found something in her jacket, the jacket she'd been wearing in the garden earlier. He held up a USB drive, the kind that held security footage files. This was in her possession, Don La Rosa. The guard's voice was neutral, but his eyes were accusatory. Standard encrypted drive, the kind used for our surveillance system. Alexis's blood turned to ice. "I've never seen that before. I don't even know how—" "Convenient," Claudia said softly. "First she appears out of nowhere with Alessandro. Then she worms her way into your home, into your trust. And now we find her stealing family heirlooms and security files." She looked at Franco with perfect, poisonous sympathy. "I hate to say it, Don La Rosa, but perhaps we should have listened to our instincts about her from the beginning." Franco was silent, the kind of silence that preceded executions. "Put her in restraints," he said finally. "Lock her in the—" The scream cut through the night like a blade. Alessandro's scream, high and hysterical, coming from the nursery above them. And then another sound, running footsteps, and Franco's sister Maria appeared at the top of the stairs, Alessandro thrashing in her arms. He woke up, Maria said, breathless. Franco, I can't calm him down. He's asking for... Mama! Alessandro's wail was heartbreaking. Mama! Mama! The guard had pulled Alexis's arms behind her back, the metal handcuffs cold against her wrists. Alessandro saw it happen, and his scream intensified into something that didn't sound human. He arched so violently in Maria's arms that she nearly dropped him. Alessandro! Basta! Franco started forward, reaching for his son, but the baby recoiled like he'd been burned. Mama! Alessandro's face was purple, tears streaming down his cheeks. Mama! Mama! Franco froze. Alexis could see the war happening behind his eyes, the evidence versus the instinct, the logic of betrayal versus the sound of his son shattering. Alessandro was hyperventilating now, choking on his own sobs. Maria looked terrified. The baby's lips were turning blue. Let her go. Franco's voice was quiet, lethal. Don La Rosa, the evidence... The guard started. I said let her go. The roar made everyone in the room flinch. Franco spun on the guard. Take the cuffs off. Now. The moment the metal released, Alexis ran. She took the stairs 2 at a time and pulled Alessandro from Maria's arms. The baby buried his face in her neck, his whole body convulsing with sobs, his small hands fisting in her hair like he was drowning, and she was air. Shh, baby. Shh, I'm here. I'm right here. Alexis rocked him, and slowly, so slowly, the screaming subsided into hiccups, into whimpers, into the heavy breathing of exhaustion. Franco stood at the bottom of the stairs, looking up at them, at his son clinging to a woman accused of betraying everything. And Alexis saw the moment he made his choice. Everyone out, Franco said, except you, Claudia. You stay. The decision to move Alessandro to the secondary compound came at 3 in the morning. Franco had spent 2 hours interrogating Claudia in his study, his voice too low for Alexis to hear through the heavy door. But the gunshot at the end had been unmistakable. When he'd emerged, his white shirt had been flecked with red, and his eyes had been empty. She talked, was all he'd said. We leave in an hour. Now Alexis sat in the back of an armored SUV, Alessandro strapped into his car seat beside her, watching the city lights blur past the bulletproof windows. Franco was in the passenger seat, his phone pressed to his ear, orchestrating something in rapid Italian. 2 more SUVs flanked them, one ahead, one behind, filled with guards whose faces she'd learned to recognize over the past 2 weeks. How far? Alexis asked, her hand resting on Alessandro's leg. The baby had finally fallen back asleep, exhausted from the night's chaos. 40 minutes. Franco glanced back at her. The house is isolated, defensible. We'll be safe there until I finish cleaning house. Cleaning house. Such a sterile phrase for what he meant. Claudia had given up names before she died, members of Franco's own organization who'd helped plan Alessandro's kidnapping. People who'd decided that Franco's grief and weakness made him a liability, that the family would be stronger without him, without his son. The ambush happened on the bridge. One moment they were crossing the Verrazzano, the water black and endless below them. The next, the lead SUV exploded in a ball of flame that turned night into day. Their driver slammed the brakes, but it was too late. A van rammed them from behind, with enough force to crack Alexis's head against the window. Alessandro woke with a scream, and the world became chaos. Gunfire shattering windows, men shouting. Franco's voice roaring orders as he returned fire through the broken windshield. Get down! Franco twisted in his seat, trying to shield them both, but another impact sent their SUV spinning. Alexis threw herself over Alessandro's car seat, feeling glass rain down on her back, hearing bullets punch through metal like it was paper. The SUV slammed into the bridge railing and stopped. Smoke filled the interior. Alexis's ears were ringing, her vision swimming, but Alessandro was still screaming, which meant he was alive, which meant she needed to move. "We have to go!" Franco was already out, dragging their driver, unconscious or dead, Alexis couldn't tell, from the front seat. "Alexis, now!" She fumbled with Alessandro's car seat, her hands shaking so badly she could barely work the buckle. More gunfire. Closer now. She could hear boots on pavement, voices coordinating in the darkness. How many? 6? 10? Franco appeared at her door, ripping it open. "Take him and run for the south checkpoint. Don't stop. Don't look back." "What about—" He pressed something cold and heavy into her hand. A gun. Alexis stared at it like he'd handed her a snake. "I don't know how to. Point and pull the trigger." Franco's eyes were wild, desperate. "The safety's off. If anyone who isn't me gets close to you, you shoot them, understand?" Alexis nodded, though she understood nothing except terror. She hauled Alessandro out of his seat, the baby clinging to her like a frightened animal, and ran. The checkpoint was 100 yards away. Might as well have been 100 miles. Her legs felt like water, and Alessandro's weight threw off her balance. And behind her the gunfire was intensifying into a full battle. She didn't look back. Franco had told her not to look back. She'd made it 50 yards when a figure stepped out from behind a burning vehicle. He was young, maybe 25, wearing body armor and carrying an assault rifle that looked like something from a war zone. His eyes locked on Alessandro, and Alexis saw his intent crystallize into action. Her body moved before her brain caught up. She raised the gun with one hand while clutching Alessandro with the other, and when the man's rifle started to swing toward them, she pulled the trigger. The recoil nearly knocked her backward. The sound was deafening. But the man stumbled, grabbing his shoulder, and Alexis pulled the trigger again, and again, until he went down and stayed down. She stood frozen, the gun still pointing at the man's body, unable to process what she'd just done. Alessandro was sobbing against her chest, and somewhere behind her, Franco was still fighting, and she'd just... "Move!" Franco's voice cut through the paralysis. He was running toward her, blood streaming from a cut above his eye. "Alexis, move!" 2 more men were coming. She could see them sprinting across the bridge, weapons raised. There was no time to think, only time to run. Franco caught up to them and scooped Alessandro from her arms, his other hand grabbing hers and pulling her forward. They ran together through smoke and fire, and Alexis kept the gun raised, even though her whole arm was shaking, even though she could feel her soul cracking under the weight of what she'd done. The checkpoint loomed ahead, concrete barriers and armed police responding to the chaos. Safety, almost there. Behind them, an engine roared to life. Franco pushed Alessandro into her arms and spun around, raising his own weapon. "Get him out of here!" "Franco, go!" Alexis ran the last 30 yards and stumbled into the arms of a police officer who pulled her behind the barrier. She turned just in time to see Franco standing alone in the middle of the bridge, silhouetted against the burning vehicles, firing at the van as it bore down on him. And then the world exploded in light and sound, and she couldn't see anything at all. Franco survived the explosion. Barely. Alexis had watched from behind the police barrier as paramedics pulled him from the wreckage, unconscious, bleeding, but breathing. They'd loaded him into an ambulance while she stood clutching Alessandro, both of them covered in smoke and blood that wasn't theirs, and she'd realized with a clarity that felt like drowning that she couldn't lose him. Not Franco. Not the man who'd become something more than the monster she'd first met in that alley. The hospital had been chaos, federal agents, NYPD. Franco's remaining loyal men forming a perimeter around his room like he was the president. And through it all, Alessandro had refused to let go of her, his small body trembling with every loud noise, his eyes too wide and too understanding for a child so young. It was Franco's sister Maria who finally gave them the missing piece. She'd come to the private waiting room where Alexis had been sequestered, her face pale and drawn. "He's awake. He's asking for you. Both of you." Franco looked like hell, bandaged, bruised, connected to machines that beeped out his heartbeat in steady rhythm. But his eyes were sharp when Alexis entered with Alessandro, tracking their movement across the room with the focus of a predator. "You shot someone." It wasn't a question. Alexis nodded, not trusting her voice. She'd killed a man. The knowledge sat in her stomach like poison, and no amount of telling herself it was self-defense could make it digest any easier. "Good." Franco's hand reached out, and after a moment's hesitation, Alexis took it. His grip was weak but certain. "You saved his life. You saved both our lives." Who were they? The question had been burning in her chest since the bridge. Claudia said names, but my cousin, Matteo. Franco's jaw clenched hard enough that Alexis could see the muscle jump. "My father's nephew. He's been positioning himself to take over the family for years, waiting for me to show weakness. When Lucia died, when Sophia left, he thought I was finished. But I held on. So he decided to remove the last thing keeping me in power. Alessandro." The pieces clicked into place with sickening clarity. He took Alessandro to destroy me completely. Either I'd die from grief, or I'd become so unstable the family would remove me themselves. Franco looked at his son, and something in his expression cracked. He almost succeeded. If you hadn't found him. A knock at the door interrupted them. One of Franco's guards entered, his face grim. "Don La Rosa, we have a location on Matteo. He's requesting a meeting. Says if you don't come alone, he starts killing civilians." Franco tried to sit up, and Alexis pushed him back down. "You can barely stand. You're not going anywhere. He's expecting me. Then he'll get me instead." The words came out before Alexis had fully thought them through, but once they were spoken, she knew they were right. "He doesn't know me. Doesn't know what I'm capable of. That's an advantage." "Absolutely not." Franco's voice was steel. "I won't let you. You don't get to let me do anything." Alexis met his eyes. "I signed a contract to protect Alessandro. That means stopping the people who want him dead. All of them." The silence stretched between them, heavy with everything they hadn't said. Finally, Franco looked at his guard. "Where?" "The Bellissimo. The alley behind the club." Of course. Of course it would be there, where this had all started, where Alexis had pulled a baby from a dumpster and changed the trajectory of all their lives. "Wire her," Franco said. "Full tactical team in position, and if anything goes wrong, we extract immediately," the guard finished. "Understood." The alley looked exactly the same. Same dumpster, same rain-slicked pavement, same smell of garbage and desperation. But Alexis was different now. She wasn't the exhausted maid in a soiled uniform. She was wearing body armor under Franco's jacket, had a gun pressed against her spine, and had an earpiece feeding her instructions from the tactical team hidden on the surrounding rooftops. Matteo was waiting by the dumpster, and the resemblance to Franco was startling. Same sharp features, same dark eyes. But where Franco's face showed every scar and loss, Matteo's was smooth, unmarked, a man who'd never paid the cost of the power he wanted. Well, Matteo's smile was all teeth. The famous Maid. Franco sent his whore instead of facing me himself? Alexis forced herself not to react. He's in the hospital. Thanks to you. A temporary setback. Matteo stepped closer, and Alexis's hand moved instinctively toward the gun. He noticed and laughed. "Please, you think I'm afraid of some street trash playing soldier? I have 20 men positioned around this block. One wrong move and they paint these walls with you." "Then why ask for a meeting?" Alexis kept her voice steady. "If you wanted me dead, I'd be dead." "Because I want Franco to watch." Matteo pulled out his phone and turned it toward her. A video feed, live footage of Franco's hospital room, of Alessandro sleeping in a chair beside his father's bed. "I want him to see what happens when he sends a civilian to do a Don's job. When you die, that baby becomes an orphan, and orphans are so easy to lose." The threat crystallized into rage, cold, clarifying. Alexis had killed a man on that bridge. She'd crossed a line she could never uncross. What was one more? "You're right about one thing," Alexis said quietly. "I'm not a soldier. I'm not part of your world. But that baby in that hospital room, he's mine. And I will burn down everything you love before I let you touch him again." She pulled the gun. Matteo moved faster than she expected, grabbing her wrist and twisting until she heard something crack. The gun clattered to the ground. Pain exploded up her arm. But Alexis didn't scream. She kicked hard, aiming for his knee, and when he stumbled, she dove for the weapon. Her fingers closed around metal, just as Matteo's boot connected with her ribs. The air rushed out of her lungs. She rolled, gasping, and found herself staring up at the same dumpster where she'd found Alessandro. Full circle, this was where it ended. Matteo stood over her, his own gun pointed at her face. "Any last words for Franco?" "Yeah." Alexis smiled through blood. "You forgot about the tactical team." The red dots appeared on Matteo's chest like constellations. He froze, his eyes going wide, and then the night erupted in voices and movement, and armed men swarming from every shadow. Franco's guard pulled Alexis to her feet as they cuffed Matteo. "Don La Rosa's orders, Miss Esposito. Never let you out of our sight." Alexis nodded, cradling her broken wrist. Alessandro was safe. Franco was safe, and the man who'd tried to destroy them both was on his knees in the same alley where this story had begun. Sometimes, she thought, the universe had a sense of poetry. The cast on Alexis's wrist was bright white against the dark silk of the dress. She'd argued against wearing something so formal to what was essentially a family meeting, but Maria had insisted, and Alexis had learned over the past month that arguing with Franco's sister was an exercise in futility. Now she sat in Franco's study, the same room where Claudia had tried to frame her, watching Alessandro toddle around with a stuffed rabbit, blissfully unaware of the tension crackling through the air. Franco stood by the window, his back to her, shoulders tight beneath his tailored suit. He'd been released from the hospital 3 days ago, against medical advice, because Matteo's arrest had triggered a cascade of revelations that required his immediate attention. 17 members of his organization had been implicated in the conspiracy. 17 people who'd sworn loyalty and then plotted to murder a child. The executions had been swift, efficient. Franco had done what needed to be done, and Alexis had tried very hard not to think about the fact that she was living with a man who could order deaths over breakfast and sleep soundly afterward. Except he wasn't sleeping soundly. She'd heard him pacing the halls at night, had seen the exhaustion carved into his face, the way he watched Alessandro with something that looked like fear, like he was waiting for the next catastrophe, the next betrayal, the next moment when everything would be ripped away. "Sophia called this morning," Franco said finally, still not turning around. "She wants to see Alessandro." Alexis's stomach dropped. "What did you tell her?" "That I'd think about it." He turned now, and the look on his face was unreadable. She's his biological mother. Legally, she has rights. If she pushed for custody, she left him. The words came out sharp, angry. She walked away when he needed her most. I know. Franco crossed to his desk and pulled out a folder. But biology carries weight in court. Blood matters, even when love doesn't. He opened the folder and slid a document across the desk. Adoption papers. Alexis's name was already filled in as the prospective parent. Alessandro Esposito La Rosa. What is this? Alexis's voice came out strangled. A choice. Franco sat on the edge of the desk, close enough that she could see the silver threading through his dark hair, the new lines around his eyes. Matteo's arrest made national news. The FBI is investigating the entire family. Social Services has questions about Alessandro's care, about why he was missing for 3 days, about the fact that his biological mother is absent and his father is a known criminal. Franco, they're going to try to take him. The admission seemed to cost him. They're going to argue that he's not safe with me, that my life, my business, everything I am makes me unfit. And they might be right. Alessandro chose that moment to crash into Alexis's legs, holding up his rabbit for inspection. She picked him up automatically, settling him on her hip. And he immediately reached for her necklace, a simple silver chain Franco had given her last week, without explanation. But if you adopt him, Franco continued, his eyes tracking the easy way Alessandro molded himself to Alexis. If you become his legal mother, that changes everything. You're a civilian, clean record, steady employment history, the kind of parent Social Services approves of. You want me to adopt him so you can keep him? Alexis heard the bitterness in her own voice. Use me as a shield against the system. No. Franco stood abruptly, and the intensity in his eyes made her breath catch. I want you to adopt him, because you already are his mother. Because he calls you Mama, and reaches for you when he's scared, and sleeps through the night, only when you're there. Because biology doesn't mean a damn thing compared to what you've given him. The words hung in the air like a confession. Alessandro babbled something and patted Alexis's cheek, and she felt tears burning behind her eyes. The contract was supposed to end when the threat was eliminated, she said quietly. Matteo's in prison. The conspirators are dead. I fulfilled my obligation. I know. Franco moved closer until he was standing right in front of her, close enough that she could smell his cologne and see the pulse jumping in his throat. That's why this isn't about the contract anymore. This is about what happens next, what we build from here. He pulled something from his pocket, a small velvet box that made Alexis's heart stop. I'm not good at this, Franco said, opening the box to reveal a ring, rose gold with a ruby, exactly like his mother's, but sized for Alexis's hand. I'm not good at words or feelings, or any of the things a man is supposed to be when he asks someone to share his life. But I know what I see when I look at you and Alessandro together. I know that you've saved him in every way that matters. And I know that somewhere along the way, you saved me too. Franco, marry me. The words were rough, desperate. Not because of the contract or the adoption or what Social Services thinks. Marry me because Alessandro needs a mother and I need... His voice cracked. I need you to stay, both of you. I need to know that when I wake up, you'll still be here, that this isn't temporary, that I haven't already lost the best thing that's ever happened to me. Alexis looked down at Alessandro, who was playing with her necklace, utterly content. Then back at Franco, at this man who'd held a gun on her in an alley and had somehow become the center of her entire world. I killed someone for him, she whispered, on that bridge. I killed a man to protect Alessandro. I know. I'm not the same person I was when you found me. Neither am I. Franco reached out and cupped her face with his tattooed hand, his thumb brushing away a tear she hadn't realized had fallen. We've both been changed by this. By him. By each other. The question is whether we're brave enough to see where that change leads. Alessandro grabbed the ring box and squealed with delight, trying to put it in his mouth. Franco gently rescued it and pulled out the ring, holding it up between them. So what do you say, Alexis Esposito? Will you be Alessandro's mother? Will you be my wife? Will you let me spend the rest of my life trying to deserve you? Alexis looked at the ring, at Franco, at Alessandro, who was watching them both with those impossibly dark eyes, like he understood exactly what was happening. She thought about the dumpster, the alley, the moment when a baby had pointed at her and said, "Mum," and rewritten her entire existence. Sometimes the universe didn't just have a sense of poetry. Sometimes it had a sense of justice. "Yes," she said, and Franco's smile was blinding. Yes to all of it. He slipped the ring on her finger, and Alessandro clapped his hands like he'd orchestrated the whole thing. And when Franco pulled them both into his arms, when he pressed his forehead against hers and whispered, "Thank you," like a prayer, Alexis realized that she'd been wrong about one thing. She wasn't the one who'd saved them. They'd saved each other. The alleyway where it all began now held a different meaning. 6 months after the wedding, Alexis stood there with Alessandro, now steady on his feet and chattering in full sentences, and Franco, whose hand rested warm and solid against the small of her back. They'd come to unveil a plaque, a memorial funded by the La Rosa family for a new community center dedicated to child welfare and family reunification services. "Why here, Mama?" Alessandro asked, tugging on her hand. Alexis knelt down to his level, brushing dark curls from his forehead. "Because this is where I learned that family isn't about where you come from, baby. It's about who shows up when you need them most." Franco had spent the months since Matteo's imprisonment transforming more than just his relationship with Alexis. He'd redirected portions of his legitimate business empire toward causes that mattered: foster care reform, support for single parents, programs for at-risk children. It wouldn't erase his past, but it was a step toward building something better for Alessandro's future. "I used to think blood was everything," Franco said quietly, watching workers hang the center's sign. That loyalty was inherited. That strength meant never showing vulnerability. "But you taught me something different." Alexis looked up at him. This man who'd held a gun on her, and then given her his heart. "You taught me that real strength is choosing love even when it terrifies you. That the most courageous thing any of us can do is show up for someone who needs us, even when we have nothing to gain from it." Franco pulled both of them close. "You climbed into a dumpster for a child you'd never met. You stayed when anyone else would have run. You fought for him when you had every reason to walk away. That's what family is. That's what love is." Alessandro wrapped his small arms around both their legs, and Alexis felt the truth of it settle into her bones. She'd been so poor she'd worked double shifts just to afford rent. She'd had nothing to offer except compassion and courage. And somehow, that had been enough. The real lesson hadn't been about fairy tales or rags to riches. It had been about the radical act of choosing to care. About the way one moment of compassion, one decision to help instead of looking away, could change everything. Not just for the person being saved, but for the person doing the saving. What we went through taught me that we all have more power than we think," Alexis said, addressing the small crowd that had gathered for the dedication ceremony. "Every one of us has the ability to change a life. Sometimes it's as dramatic as pulling someone from danger. Sometimes it's as simple as showing up, as choosing to see someone who's invisible to everyone else, as being the person who stays when it would be easier to leave." She looked at the faces in the crowd, some wealthy, some struggling, all human. If you see someone who needs help, don't wait for someone more qualified or more worthy to step in. You are enough. Your compassion is enough. One act of kindness can create ripples that change the world. Franco squeezed her hand, and Alessandro looked up at her with those dark eyes that had first locked onto hers in a rain-soaked alley and recognized something she hadn't even known she had to give. Mother, protector, fighter, family. Not because of biology, not because of money or status or destiny, because of choice. Because love, real love, was always a choice you made every single day. If this story moved you, remember, you don't need wealth or power to change a life. You just need to show up. Look around your community. Who needs help? Who's being overlooked? Sometimes the most extraordinary transformations begin with the simplest act of compassion. Choose to be someone's turning point. Choose to stay when others walk away. Choose love, even when, especially when, it costs you something. Because the baby in the dumpster might be literal, or it might be metaphorical. But somewhere, right now, someone is waiting for a person brave enough to see them. Brave enough to help. Brave enough to stay. Will you be that person?